Today I'm going to teach you 6 church growth strategies when you feel your church is stuck and is not growing in the way that you want to. I'm also going to give you one specific step you can take right now, which will help you grow a healthy church. It'll give you some ideas and resources to help you grow a healthy church. Well, the first specific step is pray. And these first few steps are probably going to be a bit left field and a bit different. But I think it's so important for pastors and church leaders when their church feels like it's hit a plateau, or maybe it's even declining, or maybe the opposite's happening. It's growing superbly and wonderfully. But to actually position yourself in a place of prayer. I think especially if your church is not growing, this can become a real burden to pastors and church leaders. And I think going back to a place of renewing prayer, jumping back into the scriptures, maybe some fasting added to the prayer, to really seek the Lord and wait on the Lord, because that burden of a church declining or plateaued and not growing can really weigh a church leader down. So actually in a place of prayer, you can cast all your cares upon the Lord. You can renew your focus on serving Jesus. Because let's face it, as pastors, sometimes we get a bit obsessed about our church growing, about church growth, about people coming to Christ and our numbers looking good. And those things can really kind of overtake our life, especially as a younger pastor. It can be really challenging for us if our church is not growing at the rate that we want it to grow. So I think the first specific church growth strategy I'm going to give you is seek the Lord. Wait on the Lord. Connect afresh with Jesus, because Jesus can guide you. He can direct you. He can give you a fresh touch of the Holy Spirit upon your life. So you actually remind yourself, why am I a pastor? Why am I a church leader? It's because I want to serve the Lord. And that kind of driven ambition to grow a church, it can kind of just get settled down in a fresh calmness by hanging around the Word of God and in prayer. Second church growth strategy when your church feels stuck is enjoy the exploits of Christ that are already happening in your church. One of the downsides of having a focus on church growth is you actually can neglect and forget to observe and watch what the Lord is already doing. And it's good to actually use this question when you're chatting to people before church or after church or in a small group setting. This works brilliantly. It's just to ask people, what's the Lord currently working on in your life? How is the Lord blessing you? How is the Lord challenging you? Is there anything that you sense that the Lord is speaking to you about? What scriptures are you enjoying? What's happening in your prayer life? You might want to even push in that hard to get that personal with people. But find out how the Lord is working. Because trust me, whether your church is growing, whether it's declining, whether it's plateauing, Jesus is building his church. He's working in the hearts of his saints. He's ministering to them. He's leading them. He's guiding them. They're finding the faithfulness of Jesus Christ through all seasons. And sometimes as pastors, we can get separated from the exploits of Christ that he's working in our congregation, amongst our people, amongst our leaders, amongst the staff we have, or the people that we're working with. So learn to ask the question, what's the Lord doing in your life this year? And if you find it's a bit, well, I haven't given enough time, ask him the last 2 or 3 years, what's God been working on in your life? And meditate on, think upon those answers. As people say, the Lord's been really helping me with my anger. The Lord's really helping me do well at work. The Lord's helping me be gracious and kind and loving to my teenager who doesn't always reciprocate with that kindness and graciousness. Enjoy the exploits of Christ that are currently happening right under your nose in your church. The third church growth strategy, when your church feels stuck, is to make sure that you slay the comparison giant. There's an interesting story in John chapter 21 when Jesus is talking with Peter. And he's telling Peter, this is how your life is going to end, that people are going to take you where you don't want to go. He's talking about his death. And Peter kind of hears this from the Lord and then turns around, looks at the beloved disciple and says, well, what about him? What's going on with him? And the Lord handles this question beautifully. He says, hey, if I want the beloved disciple to hang around until kingdom come and kind of have a different blessing, a different life to you, What is that to you? And here's a fabulous question about comparison. If I bless a church differently to how I'm blessing yours, if a church in your city is growing rapidly and yours not, what is that to you? It's a simple 5-word question that really helps you go, am I envious? Am I celebrating that? Am I wanting to put that person or that church down? Am I critical? Or do I revel in the work of God there? What is that to you when people are blessed differently to us? And there'll always be churches, regardless of what season your church is in, there'll always be churches in the opposite season. And when your church is plateaued and declining and struggling, there'll be a church that you know of that is booming, that is doing well. What is that to you is a question to wrestle with, to ask the Lord. And then Jesus says a simple 2 words. I mean, Jesus doesn't need many words, does he, to get through to us. He says to Peter, follow me. Follow me. Peter, don't worry about the beloved disciple. Pastor, don't worry about that other church. Follow me. Obey me. Serve me. Focus in on me. Now, you might be thinking, hang on, you're going to give us church growth strategies that will make our church boom and grow, John. Well, I think these are church growth strategies, and they're aimed directly not at some tactics you can make happen in your church, but they're aimed at your heart. They're aimed to just settle down that drivenness and that church growth obsession we can have as pastors and church leaders, because what's the point of having a growing church if your heart is not in the right place? So don't worry, I'm going to give you some very pragmatic things to do, but I think it's always important to start with your heart, because as Proverbs said, all of life flows out from the issues of your heart. Now, if you're enjoying this particular episode on the YouTube channel, smash that like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment for me and interact with me. And thanks so much for watching me. Now, the 4th church growth strategy, let's move into some pragmatics here, is do an audit of your church. And this would be good to do with 2 or 3 key leaders in your church, to do an audit, both quantitative and qualitative. What do I mean by that? Well, the quantitative side is the numbers, the metrics, to actually do an audit of your attendance versus your database. So if you have 50 people coming on a Sunday, how many people do you actually have? And I'm counting children amongst all those numbers, 50 children and adults on a Sunday. How many people do you have on your active database list? Whatever you call that list of everyone who calls your church their church home. And it might be 70 people, 80 people. So if you have 150 on your active list and only 50 are coming, that's telling you one of 2 things. People don't want to come to church, or your active database list is way out of date and is really bloated with people who have left. So do an audit on that. And, attendance to database will vary from 50% in some cities as high as 70%. So if you've got 100 people coming, your church generally will be around the 150 to 200 mark in terms of your active database list. But do an audit of that. Do an audit of your baptisms. How many people got baptized in the last 12 months? Do an audit of the percentage of people in small groups, percentage of adults serving. Do an audit of these things just to get some numbers and some benchmarks and ideas. How are we doing? And if our serving numbers are very low, well, that's something you can work on, because if you have more people serving, you'll grow a healthier church. There's no doubt about that. You want to do also an audit on your giving trends. What are the financials like? What's the giving year to year? What's the trend there? Audit these key metrics. What's the average age of our congregation compared to the average age of the community around us? All these quantitative things have got a story behind them. Now, also audit the qualitative things. Ask a few of your leaders, rate 1 to 10 our Sunday service. Rate 1 to 10 our leaders' meetings, our website, our social media, our communications, our atmosphere when we get together. Another question you could do in qualitative stuff, and this is all qualitative research and auditing you're doing, is give me 2 words to describe the relationships in our church. Give me 2 words to describe communication in our church. Give me 2 words to describe the preaching in our church. You could go on and on and on. You get the idea. And what you're doing is auditing the qualitative, the vibe, the atmosphere, how we're going in key areas of the church. And that's very much personal opinion based. But you can collate some of those, do a few surveys. You can collate them and go, wow, our church is not growing because people rate our Sunday service as not being very good, or they rate the preaching as being poor, or the relationships don't feel very loving. What is it? And then the quantitative side, the metrics will give you feedback and story as well. And you want to maybe check out with a coach or a consultant to kind of come in and do an audit as well. Have one of your friends do a bit of an audit. Look at those quantitative and quantitative analysis, and maybe one of your pastor friends sit down with you and go through them, or get a coach or a consultant in to do this more formally. But at some level, face, here's a phrase I like to use, face the brutal reality of where you're at. Okay, number 5 of the church growth strategies when your church feels stuck is assess your visitor's pathway. Now, that pathway starts at your website, on social media. The digital door is the new front door of the church, has been for years now. Check out your website. How oriented towards visitors is it? Do you have your Sunday service time and a Google map on the front page of your website above the fold? No one has to scroll to get to those 2 essential things. Check out when people arrive. What's the experience like? The parking, the front door. Can they find your front door easily? Can they find the children's ministry, the bathrooms, the toilets? Can they find them easily? Where's the auditorium? Might be obvious to you, but it's not obvious to visitors. How's our signage? What's the Sunday service like for a visitor? What does it feel like for them? What about after the service? What do we do with the visitors? How do we connect with them? How do we relate to them? How do we do follow-up with them? What do we do in our follow-up of visitors? How do we try and get them back for a second visit? So much in a visitor's pathway. Now check out the description below, the link to the 3-minute quiz on how to grow your church, how to grow a healthy church. This quiz only takes 3 minutes to finish. Check it out in the description below. The link's there. It'll give you resources and ideas. It'll help you with that audit process of what's going on with our visitors pathway, with the journey of people joining in our church. This is the quiz I want you to take. Check it out below. Now, number 6, the last church growth strategy to take when your church feels stuck, and this is for pastors and church leaders, is renew your personal evangelism endeavors. This is so important because I think as pastors, we can get separated from non-Christians. We can have only Christian friends and go to Christian events, and all we're doing is hanging out with believers. And we want to hang out with believers, but I believe pastors need to connect with non-Christians, to relate to unbelievers, because then you realize how hard it is actually sometimes to invite someone to church, how hard it is to share the gospel, how difficult it can be to actually find an opportunity to share Jesus with someone who doesn't know the Lord. And you could be telling your church, come on church, reach out to your friends, reach out to your neighbors. But if you're not doing it, then all your exhortation and preaching around that becomes quite weak, because there's no personal story. There's no story of, hey, I invited someone, they said they were coming, but they didn't turn up. And how do you handle the disappointment of that? And I found with our church that when I renewed my personal evangelism endeavors, it really made a difference to the evangelism potency of our church, because I would share stories. I'd invite people. People would come along who I'd invited, and I was able to kind of just gossip it around the church, not always in my preaching, but hey, I'm reaching out to this person. I'm praying for this unbeliever. And I think as you renew your personal evangelism endeavors, it can make a big difference to the growth potential of your church. Now, take the 3-minute quiz. There are heaps of resources in this quiz. It only takes 3 minutes. Jump in, click the link, and enjoy that. And I pray and hope that these church growth strategies really help you when your church feels stuck.